Hola everyone, welcome to Flexibility Script. This video is going to be going into some things that will help improve the mobility of your spine, of your back, both in flexion and in extension. So the rounding and the arching of our spines. There's an old saying that's you are as old as your spine. Really highlights the importance of the ability to keep our spines in a good condition as we keep aging, and that is usually where everything stems from. If we have good thoracic spine mobility, our shoulders are going to be working well. If we have some good movement through our lumbar spine, there's a good chance that our hips and body will just be able to move with more ease if we keep our spines working as best as they can. And so these exercises really go into helping improve the mobility of the spine, so meaning that they're going to be a little bit more in the active flexibility side to help improve the ability of the arching and the rounding of the back, the whole entire back. The exercises involve the use of a popular exercise known as cat-cow, which cat is when you're rounding and you're on an all fours or quadrupedal position, and then you're arching for that cow part of it to create as much extension through the whole entire back. So we'll be using that exercise, but adding a couple things to it to help make it count and make the best of it. So a couple of things with the cat and cow. So when I come to all fours, and I want my knees to be positioned right underneath the hips and my hands to be positioned right underneath the shoulders. It's really important to think of what you're asking, not just what you're asking of your spine with arching, with rounding and arching, but think of what you're asking of your other parts. If you start drawing some energy and attention into your hips and into your arms and shoulders, you'll be able to do add a little techniques to help you be able to pull yourself into more rounding and pull yourself also into more arching. So if you think of your pelvis, when you go into rounding, if you think about tucking your pelvis under, that will usually start the wave to be able to travel up to keep rounding through the rest of your system. Same thing if you start at your pelvis and you think about tipping it forward. As you tip it forward, it really helps you go into extension through the rest of your spine and the rest of your back. So when we're doing the cat and cow, keep thinking of initiating that movement with the pelvis with flexion and extension, or tucking under, rounding, or arching, whichever word feels best. They both mean the same thing. When we're going into thinking of our arms, if we think about pulling our arms down towards us, it's going to help us be able to get more into extension. And then if we think about putting the energy away from us, it's going to help you go more into rounding, into flexion. So I'm just going to keep it simple and say rounding and arching of your back from here on out instead of flexion and extension. Alright, so I'm on all fours, and then from here I'm going to think about starting at the pelvis, and I'm going to start with the rounding component of it. So when I'm thinking rounding, I'm thinking about tucking my hip under, and then the other thing, I'm thinking about pushing my hands away from me without them actually moving, but creating that energy will help me be able to round more. It's really good to try to articulate through each part of your spine and try to make connections with each part of your back and what it is you're asking of it. So I'm going to start at the pelvis, and I'm going to think tuck under. There's me tucking my pelvis under. Then as I keep trying to tuck under, then I'm thinking bring that belly button up towards the ceiling, then the bottom of the rib cage, then my sternum up towards the ceiling, and I keep rounding. I keep pushing the ground away till as I'm rounding through the rest of my spine, I'm going to think retract my head so that the cervical spine can go into flexion, and there I'm in my fully rounded position. From here, I'm going to reverse the energy, and I'm going to see if I could keep my upper back and my head in flexion and try to articulate and start from the pelvis up. So from here, I'm going to be thinking about tipping that pelvis forward, and I keep tipping that pelvis forward. I keep tipping it forward. From there, I follow through with my belly button, then the bottom of my rib, then my sternum, and the energy through my hands is that of pulling pulling, pulling, pulling. As I keep traveling that wave up, I'm going to think retract the neck here till the very last thing to look up is the head. And then I'm in my fully extended position, keeping that energy of pulling myself in. I can stay here, and from here I'm going to same thing in reverse. I'm going to see if I can maintain as much extension through my cervical and my thoracic as I isolate and try to tuck under my hip, then my lower back, bottom of my rib cage. Then I keep traveling up, pushing the energy away from me with my hands till the very last thing is retracting the head, retracting the neck so that the head could go down. From here, I'll reverse it one more time. I think pelvis, tip that pelvis forward, then the lower back, belly button, bottom of the rib cage, sternum, top of the sternum, the chest really pulling through my hands, pulling them in towards me, retract my head, and look up. So, as you go through, I usually do a couple of those, maybe upwards towards 5. And with every repetition, I find that I get a little bit better with making a little bit more of a connection with each part of my back as I'm going through the motion. A thing I mentioned as I was doing it was your head. There's a tendency to want to round, 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 and then just drop your head, or extend, 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 and then just look up. Try to make a connection with your cervical spine as well, and know that you'll get more out of it when I go to round, that instead of just dropping my head, to retract and get that vertebrae to move back and then bring my head down. And then the same goes with the extension part, that as I'm traveling up into extension, that I also think retract and then bring my head up, as opposed to just being here and looking up. It will feel very different when we get a little bit of motion in that retracting and then lifting up as you go into the cat and cow. So after you've warmed up your back, now we can get into a little bit more of the active flexibility work to help improve the ranges of motion in it. So the work that's being done is that you're going to push, and then you're going to pull yourself into a further endpoint. So when we're in flexion, I know I mentioned the energy of your hands. When you're in flexion, you're going to think of, when you're in rounding, you're going to be thinking of pushing your hands away from you and tucking that pelvis under. So I'm going to be thinking 2 things. I'm going to think push, and I think at the same time, push my knees back away from me. And as I do that, pushing my knees back without actually moving and pushing my hands away will help me be able to round more. In reverse, if I pull my knees forward and pull my hands back, it'll help me go into a little bit more extension. So those are the 2 energies we're working with, the pulling the hands towards the knees and the knees towards the hand, and vice versa, pushing the hands away and pushing the knees away from each other. So the knees away from the hands, I should say. So to do this, I'm going to be rounding, and I'm going to be going for a 5-second contraction where I'll let you know you're going to push and pull, and then on the other 5-second contraction you'll do the same, but it'll help you get into rounding a little bit better. So to sum it up, I know that was a lot. So when I'm rounding, I'm going to think about, to start the first contraction, I'm going to think about reversing things. So I'm going to think about pulling my hands towards my knees for the first one. Then when I'm done, I'm going to think about pushing the hands that way and the knees that way to get into my furthest flexion. So I'm going to tuck under, and I'm going to get myself into that rounding position. Then for 5 seconds, I stay in that rounded position, but I'm going to think about pulling my hands and knees towards one another while trying to maintain myself rounding for 5, 4, 3. I really feel my abdomen here. 2, 1. When I relax, I'm going to reverse the energy. I'm going to push my hands away from me, push my knees away, and I'm usually able to get into more flexion, and I hold that for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I relax. So I stay in flexion, and I'm going to think about the first contraction is pulling my knees towards my hands and hands towards the knees. Then to get into more flexion, I'll reverse it and I'll go the other way. I'll really do what we do in the original cat-cow, which is that pushing away will help me go into more flexion. So first contraction is pull, and then the second, when I go the other way, push away, I'm able to get more flexion. So again, I'll come down, I'll do that tuck under, get myself in that fully flexed position, fully rounded. And then for the first contraction, I'll try to pull my hands towards my knees, hold there, keep my rounding for 5, 4, 3, 2, really pull, 1. I slowly ramp that back down, and then again, I'm gonna push the knees away from the hands and the hands away from my knees, and I'll find myself able to go into more flexion, and I hold that for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. You'll find that after you do that first contraction, that when you go to do the second contraction, you're able to get your spine more into flexion. The same technique is going to be used in extension, except it's reversed, meaning that my first contraction is going to be the pushing my hands away from my knees and my knees away from my hands. Then on the second contraction, I'm going to try to pull myself into more extension. So what that looks like, I'm on all fours. I'm going to find my extension, so tip forward, belly button, bottom of my rib cage, sternum, pulling my hands towards me, and there I'm at my end point. So from here, I'm going to think, for that first contraction, I'm going to think, push my hands this way, push my knees this way, without losing any extension. So from here, I'm going to start with pushing away, hold 5, 4. On this one, you really will feel the back start like really contracting. 3, 2, 1. I relax, and now from here, I'm going to pull my hands towards my knees and my knees towards my hand, and I really find the ability to get into more extension, and I hold that for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I can relax, shake it out, and I can repeat. So tip forward, get myself in my fullest extension, and then again, begin the first contraction, 5 seconds, where my hands drive forward, my knees drive back without actually moving. And then from here again, push 5, 4, 3, really trying to drive my knees away, my hands away, 2, 1, relax. And I'm going to try to pull my hands towards my knees towards my hand, and hold that for 5, 4. You'll feel yourself more able to go into further extension, 2, 1, and relax. And then when you're all done, you can do, depending on the intensity of how much contraction. When I was contracting, I was at about 50% of intensity, and I can, as I count down the 5 seconds, I can ramp it up a little bit more every single time in terms of how much maximum volume I can contract in the positions. Once I go for anywhere from 2 to 5 rounds of those contract and relax, I sometimes will just do flexion if that's what my spine really needs. I'll sometimes do extension, or I'll do both like I just demonstrated today. To finish things off, it's good to go back to how you first started warming up with that cat and cow. And then what you'll find is that you're better able to segment through each part and have more of a connection and have an improvement in your flexion and in your extension as I go through. There's my flexion, pushing my hands away from my knees. And then I'm going to reverse. And I'll feel a lot better moving through my spine, both in flexion and extension. And I like recording myself because I usually can see a visual improvement along with that feeling in my body of being able to get into flexion and extension with more ease. So give it a shot. I did my best to explain it via video, so I really hope it does help. Again, if you're trying to get into rounding and your first contraction is that of bringing the hands towards the knees, and then once you're done contracting that way, you'll push away, and that'll help you get further into flexion, and you hold that for 5 seconds. When you're in extension and arching, your first contraction will be the opposite. I'm going to think of that pushing away, my knees away from my hands for that first contraction, and on the second contraction, when I pull the hands towards my knees, I'll be able to get further extension after the 5 seconds of contraction. So give it a shot. I hope it helps. Bye.